Hello everybody, and I am back again with a new ramble for all of you, and this time I'm going to talk about something very different and very interesting. I'm going to introduce you all to a book series that you may or may not have heard of, known as The Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. Specifically, I will talk about side jobs. But first, a little backstory on The Dresden Files and how I actually got into this series. So, personally, I blame my dad on this one. So a while back in high school, I actually found a few of his hardbacks of the Dresden Files. And being extremely curious about it, especially when it mentioned magic, supernatural, and murder mystery, I was like, you know what? I want to read this. I want to see where this goes. Needless to say, most of my high school years were spent reading this series. And my God, was I hooked. This series has a lot of things going for it that really adds up in the positives for it. It has an amazing story. It has really good characters that you actually feel attached to. It has everything of the supernatural as well as magical and even murder mystery. It's a literal hot pot of all these categories mixed together into a fantastic story. Now, to get onto the track of side jobs. So for a while now, I've been off track on the Dresden Files, as in I have not read any of the books in a while, so I figured as a good way to get myself back into the series, I would read this book here. Now, Side Jobs is pretty much a compilation of multiple different short stories that takes place across the Dresden Files up until the book changes. And honestly, some of these stories were really good. Some of them ranging from comedic to absolutely horrifying. And throughout it all I can say is, seriously, Harry needs a break. With all the shit that he deals with on a regular basis, the dude needs a break. But yeah, this definitely hooked me from start to finish, being able to see all these different short stories playing out at some point in the series. And hell, there were even some of the characters here mentioned before that actually had their own viewpoint stories. And I actually found that very refreshing, because it really gives you a backstory to some of these other characters, such as Thomas Wraith, Harry's half-brother, who is a vampire, as well as you also get a story from the perspective of Karen Murphy, a police detective in Chicago's Special Investigations Department. And I find that highly refreshing, how it's not just Harry's point of view that we get here, but also two of the other main characters throughout the series. Now, some of my favorite stories that I read throughout Side Jobs, I'm going to go over them. So first on the list here, I'm going to go with Restoration of Faith, which apparently takes place before any of the books in the series. And to be quite honest with you, it was actually really interesting to see some of that before the very first book in the series, Stormfront. And it's pretty simple, really. Harry's working to find a lost child, and he finds her, only to find out that she comes from a very rich family who treats her less like a child and more like a doll to be put on display. Along the way, as he's crossing one of the bridges in Chicago, he actually comes across a massive troll named Gogoth. And holy crap, this dude is creepy. At some point during the fight that he has with this thing, he actually manages to split it down the middle and cause a bunch of little mini trolls to pop out. And I'm like, dude, how do you deal with this stuff? And it was a short little introduction. I actually kind of liked it. Now, let's get to some other really good ones. Some other ones I really liked were, let's see here. I'm looking in the book right now. Backup which again is a story revolving around Thomas Wraith, Harry's half-brother. And I gotta admit, it was really fascinating to hear Thomas's story of how he is trying to cope with his vampire behavior whilst also dealing with what they call the Oblivion War. And apparently the Oblivion War, which I didn't even know about, actually focuses on taking down a bunch of different minor gods. Very evil, nasty ones too. And it's not so much killing them as it is making sure that they are forgotten. And to be quite honest with you, that was really cool. And the whole time I'm reading this, I'm just like, damn. So they're going after minor gods and erasing them from history, erasing them from the minds of humanity. And all I can think as I'm reading this is just, wow. But now we'll get to two of my all-time favorites here. The Warrior and Love Hurts. Now, The Warrior was a really fun story to read as it features one of my favorite side characters in the Dresden Files, Michael Carpenter. Now, Michael Carpenter is or was, at this time that The Warrior takes place, a Knight of the Cross. Now, Knights of the Cross in the Dresden Files are described as 3 warriors chosen to wield holy swords. And each of these 3 swords contains a nail from the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And as soon as I heard about that, I was just like, okay, this should be fun. And it really, really was. Now, The Warrior addresses Harry's guilt over his friend Michael Carpenter's crippling injuries, which take place at the end of Small Favor. And it was really fascinating to see Harry's guilt over what he believes was his fault that Michael Carpenter could no longer be a Knight of the Cross. And during all of this, it is shown that Harry is being targeted by one of the Holy Fathers, as Harry is currently holding 2 of the holy swords of the cross at this time. Amaricius and Fidelicius, the sword of love and the sword of faith, respectfully. However, this religious father does not believe Harry to be worthy of holding these swords because he is a wizard. So throughout it all, we are seeing Harry getting targeted by this guy to one point where he almost gets shot by the equivalent of a P90. Or a massive sniper rifle. He just gets shot at multiple times throughout this. And to be quite honest with you, just the damage that was described after Harry took a tumble, after nearly getting shot at, wow. Who knew snipers could do so much damage? Just yikes. But I really like how we actually see another side to Michael Carpenter, how he's not just a holy man, who is fully a faithful follower of Christ. We actually at one point see Michael Carpenter snap when one of his children is threatened. And it always holds true. Even the most faithful man can snap when it comes to their children. And seeing Michael Carpenter's wrath as he's beating this rogue father nearly to death was horrifying and yet gripping to read. And this whole time I'm thinking, don't do it, dude. Don't do it. But at the last second, Harry steps in and saves Michael's soul from being tainted with murder. It's just, anytime I see these two together, it's always going to be an amazing story that talks about faith as well as how people go about doing what they do. And it was honestly really fun to read. But finally, we get to the last one, Love Hurts. So in this one, we find out that Harry and Murphy are on a case dealing with a spellcaster who's causing random people to fall in love with each other, ranging from just strangers on the street to a literal brother and sister. Yeah, I know what y'all are thinking. Ew. So we see Harry and Murphy walking around, they're investigating what they all had in common. And they find out that it's related to a state fair. So they go there, they start investigating, and they find out the instigator as a Red Court vampire. Now to explain what the Red Court is, the Red Court of vampires is pretty much your classic bloodsuckers. They feast on human blood, they can turn into giant bats, and they can just be straight up horrifying to look at. So yeah, you would not want to meet these things in a dark alley. But the biggest part of it I really enjoyed reading about was the kind of romantic tension you feel between Harry and Murphy, which is definitely something that most fans of the series would always notice throughout the books as it builds. You see how Harry and Murphy go back and forth between each other and how they realize that they are both damaged people who have had losses when it comes to the department of romance. They both had bad relationships and they look at each other and they honestly try to keep rationalizing why they would not work together, despite all the major chemistry they share. These two have literally been through hell and back, and honestly, at one point in the short story, when they finally kissed, I was half tempted to jump out of my seat and cheer, loudly and gloriously, screaming out to the heavens, "Finally!" But then only to find out that it was apparently caused by mental manipulations. Oh boy, howdy, was I glad to watch the Red Court vampire die. But yeah, I definitely would recommend Side Jobs if you all want a taste of the Dresden Files, or I would also recommend checking out the first book in the series called Stormfront. If any of you are interested in a massive series filled with magic, the supernatural, murder mystery, religion, and just about anything you could think of under the sun, this series has a lot of it. And I honestly would recommend it if you want a good time. If you just want a good story to read, this is it right here. Anyways, thank you all for listening. Have a good day.